Well, welcome back, everybody. You're here with Moose the Gimp. I'm your host, Moose the Gimp. And today is a very special day. We have our first live interview via Skype with none other than 7-decade entertainer, the original Pat Boone. Mr. Boone, how are you today?
I'm doing good. You can just refer to me as Pat the Gump.
Oh. The Gramp, right? Pat the
Like,
Gramp.
well, Pat the Gramp, or
Yeah.
like Forrest Gump.
Oh,
Either
okay,
way.
yeah. Okay. I can relate to that.
Or even Grump. The Gimp and the Grump.
I get crabby too sometimes. Well, thanks for making time for us today. Both of us live in the greater Los Angeles area. We've seen so many disturbances lately with protests and whatnot. I was fortunate enough to pick up one of your original books, Twixt 12 and 20.
Ah.
1958. It was advice for teenagers. And in 1958, you wrote that social responsibility was one of the things that you wanted to teach young people and teenagers.
Right.
How has your advice changed now that it's 2020? How has it changed maybe since 1958?
Boy, well.
Or does it apply today?
Well, no, of course it does. No, it does apply today. And you're right. It's not just my advice, but the whole society has changed so drastically that kids today are trying to fit into and figure out. And in too many cases, they're being misled in a way that was not the case when I wrote my first book. I was still in college. Yeah. I was in college at Columbia University. I was on my way to graduating magna cum laude in 1958. And while I was there, because I was having hit records and movies and doing my own television show, the Pat Boone Chevy Show, all of this at the same time.
Right.
And not only that, but fathering 4 daughters. When I graduated from college in 1958 at age 23, Shirley and I had 4 kids already. Now that's kind of rushing things, but still, I was asked because I had this immense teenage following, and I was matching Elvis record for record all through the 50s. I had an 11-month head start on him, thank God, so that when he burst on the scene with Heartbreak Hotel, I was coming off 6 million selling singles.
Yeah.
2 of them number ones, and in the rest of the 50s, from 55 through 59, I had 41 chart singles. He had 40. So I actually had 1 more chart record.
Amazing.
Fortunately, I had an 11-month head start. So in the middle of that, while I was making the movie April Love in California on a break from school, I wrote a book at the request of the publishers of advice for teens.
Yeah.
And I was trying to make it good, moral, useful advice about things that mattered at that time. It was things like hygiene and dating and politeness and respecting your parents and authority and teachers and having faith and being the kind of friend that you wanted to have as friends and all kinds of good advice. And the book, I think partly because of my popularity at that time with the kids, went to number 1 it just immediately sold 1 million copies and kept going.
Yeah.
And was the number 1 nonfiction bestseller for 2 years. Only exceeded by Art Linkletter's Kids Say the Darndest Things and Norman Vincent Peale's The Power of Positive Thinking. Number 3 was Pat Boone's book of advice for teens called Twixt 12 and 20. Right. The reason it was called that was I didn't want to commercialize on the word teen because the teen market was really just becoming a thing. I mean, there had been no teen market up till then, but even then, I mean, the teenage teens was being commercialized. So I didn't want to call it Pat Talks to Teens. So I called it Twixt 12 and 20. People say, well, what does that mean? Well, what's between or Twixt 12 and 20? It's the teens.
Right.
And besides,
well, I mean, been able to stay relevant for so long, almost eight decades, over 7 decades, and being a Christian entertainer, I just find it remarkable how relevant that you've been able to stay. Like Gloria Swanson and Sunset Boulevard was kind of a recluse, right? But you've been active and outgoing and
Oh
you look
yeah.
vibrant as ever. How have you been able to stay relevant for so long?
Well, it's several things. People have sometimes they quit asking me that not this now, but for many years they'd say, "How come you look younger than we know you are?"
Hmm.
And I say it's three things: lots of milk, lots of exercise, and a clean conscience.
Right.
Now, milk just refers to healthy diet. And yes, I did drink a lot of milk. Then I've been on the white uh, 2% for a long time milk.
Yeah.
But exercise, and that's self-explanatory. And I'm an athlete. I've always been. I still play tennis. I still swim. I ride my bike. I work out in the gym. So I'm healthy at 86. But the clean conscience. People say, "How do you have a clean? Your conscience doesn't get dirty. You don't ever do anything wrong." I said, "I've done a lot of things wrong, and my conscience does get dirty, but I know where to go to have my conscience cleaned." "What do you
Hmm.
mean?" "Well," I said, "I have a Savior. His name is Jesus. And if I commit sins, and I have plenty times, I can ask him to forgive me, and I'll try not to commit those same sins again. And he does forgive me, so I don't carry guilt. I don't walk around with guilt or fear. And if you can get rid of guilt and fear, they tell us that 70% of the illnesses in the hospital are the result of those things: anxieties, stress, and guilt. And if I can be free of those things, and I am, thanks to the Lord, then I can still stay healthy and strong and active. And that's my secret.
I've been through a lot of hospitalizations in my lifetime with
Yeah.
our dealt with, but being in the hospital has been one of the time when I see Jesus show up, and he says that it's in your trials where I show up, and in the hospitals is where I've
Yeah.
always seen his face, and whether it's a nurse or a doctor, but being a Christian entertainer has I can't imagine that has been an easy ride for you, and Kevin Sorbo, who you're very good friends with, I understand.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
once thought he mentioned that he thought he was blackballed from regular Hollywood because of his Christian faith. And I just want
He probably was.
yeah.
I have been, sure.
I mean, that's what was going to be my question was, do you feel like you've been blackballed to an extent, or have you
I
been
know
able
it.
to still carve a great niche for yourself?
Well, yes, I am persona non grata. That is, I'm not invited to all the big parties,
Mm.
most of the premieres anymore. I'm not invited to be on the shows where they bring a lot of entertainers together to do good causes. I've been very very active in a lot of good causes, still
Mhm.
am, but almost in spite of the fact that my peers in the entertainment business have long decided that I'm a stick in the mud. I'm too religious, goody two shoes. I'm irrelevant. And yet, you know what? It's been long enough, Christian, that some of my fellow performers have admitted to me, I used to think that you were such a square. I
Mm.
used to think that you didn't know what was happening or going on. But he said, I've noticed over the years you stayed married for 65 years. None of us have.
It's a beautiful
That you,
Shirley, right?
to Shirley, you've raised 4 great kids. You're still active and healthy. You're still making movies. I've got a movie scheduled to go in September. It's been postponed. I was in God's Not Dead 2. Kevin Sorbo was in God's Not Dead 1.
Right.
And the first one, I was in God's Not Dead 2. And I've done another Christian film since then. And I'm about to do one for the Golf Channel now for secular distribution about a golfer and he has been a professional, much respected, terrific golfer who's now retired, but becoming a mentor for
Right.
younger golfers who are having emotional problems affecting their golf. And I am called in to try to help them straighten out their marriages or their relationships with their kids or other problems so they can
Wonderful.
concentrate well on their golf. And it's based on a book which has been a bestseller among golfers called The Mulligan.
Yes.
And that book, of course, that has to do with a second chance.
Right, second chance, right.
A
Take it over,
do
do it over, yeah.
a do-over. That's what a mulligan is. And so obviously these are Christian people that are producing the film, but it's
Right.
not being done as a quote Christian film,
Right.
and it's a secular film
Maybe
in
that's
which
the secret. Maybe that's the secret is you send a message through the movie, but you don't maybe market it as a quote
yeah,
unquote Christian movie, right?
definitely, and that's why films like well, Heaven is for Real is 40 or 50, $60 million success,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a true story they had to deal with, and they couldn't ignore it, about a 4-year-old who died on the operating table from a burst appendix, which is really a rare among little kids.
Right.
But and the poison resulted in his body and killed him. But prayer brought him back, and when he came back, he had been to heaven, and he's telling people things there's no way for a 4-year-old to know. And
Yes.
I'm trying to think of the great actor that played the dad in the film.
Greg Kinnear. Was it Greg Kinnear?
Greg
Yeah.
Kinnear, you're right.
Yeah.
And I know it had an effect on him, as
Yes.
God's Not Dead had on Kevin and the other films he's done, because we're telling true stories about the ways God has come into secular life.
Yes.
And into secular people's lives. In the case of the little boy, he was the son of a minister, but there was no way a 4-year-old knew, for example, about his little sister that he missed after he came back. And he told his mom, sort of playing with his toys, I miss my sister. She said, your little baby sister's in the other room. No, he said, the one that died in your tummy. He didn't know about that. Nobody had ever told him.
Wow.
But she had appeared to him in heaven and identified herself as his sister. So his mom, in her shock, said, well, what's her name? And the little 4-year-old said, you didn't give her a name. She doesn't have a name. She's waiting for you to give her a name. Now, no 4-year-old
right.
knew that.
Right.
And so, I mean, when God invades our lives in ways that we really have to be blind not to recognize, we make up words like luck, serendipity,
right.
So many other words, good fortune, serendipity,
chance,
chance, all these words, instead of just saying, oh, thank you, Lord.
Yeah.
And so
everything is on purpose. I mean,
yeah.
he knew,
well,
he knew
I don't know that he causes things. Sometimes the things that happen to us are the result of our own actions, but the Bible says he works everything together for good.
Absolutely, yeah.
For those who love him and are called according to his purpose.
Yes. Well, I'm sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
He can even make tragedy work to our good. And I think in your case, and sometimes in mine and my family's, we've dealt with it too, that, as you said, going through a travail, going through a tremendous setback, going through even illness and sometimes irreversible things that happen, bring things out of us that make us able to help other people in ways that if we were just like anybody else, we couldn't help. I could give you many examples, but you're a good one.
Thank you. Well, the mulligan is, I don't know, maybe that kind of gives us a hint that you're a sports fan. I have a feeling that you are a sports fan. So I really wanted to ask you about your involvement with the Oakland Oaks way back in the 60s. Now, people don't understand that the Oakland Oaks were an original ABA team, which was a precursor to the National Basketball Association.
Well, the National Basketball, I got to correct you there. The NBA, of course, was alive and well. The ABA was created as an auxiliary.
Yes.
Not a replacement.
They were trying to be kind of like a second organization, and they brought a lot of things that, maybe more of an entertainment aspect to the game.
Yeah, the 3-point shot, for one.
Yes,
we
correct.
Introduced that, and the red, white, and blue ball, and that 26-foot semicircle from which you would shoot the 3-point play. I mean, those things now are a regular part. I mean, they're one of the sensational things in basketball that originated in the ABA, and I helped start the NBA, the league, and then was sole owner of the Oakland Oaks that won the championship in our second year.
Yeah, right. And you had Rick Barry was a member
Rick
of that.
Barry was our big star, but there were
Yeah.
a couple of others, like Larry Brown, who became one of the great coaches, Doug
Yeah,
Moe,
right.
who also became a great coach. And then, of course, the ABA introduced people like Julius Erving, Dr. J,
Yes, right.
and George Gervin, the Iceman, and these great players, and
Yeah.
a lot of individual superlatives like flying through the air and jumping over each other, things that were not
Yeah,
part of the NBA, but the
right.
ABA broke it open into
Yes.
a wide open, more exciting kind of game.
Do you still follow basketball?
Oh yeah, sure, yeah.
Because I want to credit you for the run that the Golden State Warriors had. I think there was something that you had some sort of secret that that when you were with the Oakland Oaks that permeated the Warriors and helped them with their success the last few years.
Well,
But
Rick Barry, we took Rick Barry from the Warriors, and we tried to take Nate Thurmond as well, and they sued me, and actually they won a judgment against me, which my own attorney said was wrong. I should not have been liable because our contract, which Rick Barry had signed, was called restraint of trade. He should have been able to play for anybody he wanted, but they were holding him back, and so of course I was found by the judge in San Francisco, who might have been a little prejudiced, to be guilty, and it cost me a lot of money. But I did own the championship team. However, I was not able to get enough of the Bay Area fans to come to our games, even when we won the championship and beat the Indiana Pacers.
yes.
I couldn't get enough people. Only 8,000 people when we won the championship, and when we were winning 17 games in a row.
Yeah.
With Rick Barry. But
what arena or a venue did they play in back then?
We were playing the Oakland Arena.
Okay.
And so there was a great rivalry between Oakland and San Francisco, but even the Oakland fans were fans of the Warriors until they had their own team, and they were still fans of the Warriors. And of course we had Rick Barry. And of course, we were building, if we'd only existed for 3 or 4 more years, we would have been very much a rival of the Warriors in every way. And so
that team eventually was sold, I believe, and then they became the Virginia Squires.
Right.
Yeah.
They were the Washington Capitals first, and then the Virginia Squires. Yeah.
Were you ever involved in any other ownerships of teams, or was that?
No, because I lost so much money with the Oakland Oaks. I mean, millions. That when I had the opportunity to be a participant with the Phoenix Suns and the Dallas Mavericks, I passed.
Okay.
I said, I'll just play. I won't try to be an owner anymore. But that was a bad mistake.
So as we were talking about earlier, you're still relevant, still working in big films. I understand that you got a movie that you're going to start filming maybe in September. You mentioned, is that The Mulligan, or is that?
That's The Mulligan. The Mulligan.
Okay.
And I'll be living at they're taking over a country club outside Atlanta.
Oh wow.
They'll take over the club. We'll have it for shooting for the month. And I'll be living there in the clubhouse. They have quarters for out-of-town guests. So the director, producer, and I, and maybe one of the other actors will be staying at the country club. They'll feed us, house us for the whole month. And when I'm not shooting, I can play golf.
Awesome. Well,
and get paid to do it.
Exactly right. Your whole life has been an incredible testimony. And have you seen your life like that as a testimony?
I wanted it to be, and it has. I mean, Christiane, when I first started, I can sing, but there's a lot of people can sing, and some people can sing better. although I think I am a pretty good singer and I've done extremely well. But I knew that what was happening to me in the early part of my career, the way I even had a record contract, the way I won a talent contest, the forerunner of American Idol, called the Ted Mack Amateur Hour, which which was national, and it led to my contract. And then my very first record was a top 10 million seller, Two Hearts, Two Kisses. The next was Ain't That a Shame, #1. And then go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say Fats Domino song. That's right. Yeah.
Fats Domino, yeah. And I hold a record in the record business now of 220 consecutive weeks.
Wow.
Without ever being off the single chart. That's
Amazing.
almost, it's 4 years or so.
Yeah, that's unheard of. Yeah.
The closest anybody's ever come is Elton John, and his was about 170 weeks or something. Mine was 220 consecutive weeks. I was always on the single chart, usually with one record going up and the other coming down.
Okay.
Elvis went to the Army after about 3 years, and he didn't record. That broke his string. And then the Beatles began after about 3 years to just put out albums, not singles.
Right.
And so they were off the single chart. But for the Billboard Cashbox record industry charts, I hold a record unequaled of 220 consecutive weeks without ever being off the charts.
That's incredible.
And they've got me listed as like the #9 artist, #9 or #10 artist, not only of the 50s, but 50s and 60s.
Wow. Again, you and I are in the greater LA area, and we've been on this kind of social lockdown for almost 4 months now. With the things going on in the world with the COVID virus and the chaos with the protests, and not necessarily not the protests, but the violence that has occurred as a result of it from these fringe groups, is this kind of is this we're waiting for Jesus to come back? Is this kind of do you feel like this is a time where we really need to get down and get into the Word again?
That's a great question. I wish more people were asking it. The Associated Press poll has recorded that over 50%, something like 60% of the people they polled believe that the coronavirus is a sign from God. What it's doing to our country. Now, a sign from God doesn't necessarily mean that we're entering the last days, although I think we're very much on the brink of that. And of course, if it's a sign from God, then that implies that God is expecting to know what our reaction is. And I do believe that he has our attention, that as always, when we get into extremely serious problems where we don't have answers and only he does, he's got our attention. Now he wants to know our intention. Right. If he rescues us from this economic collapse we're in, if he rescues us from the coronavirus so that it doesn't keep going up and down, that we have to stay quarantined and isolated and wearing masks all the time and subject to these riots and vandalism and all the other things that are tearing us apart. If he's going to rescue us from this, are we still going to keep taking his name off everything? Are we still going to deny kids a chance to say a prayer at the beginning of a school day? Are we going to keep putting his "In God We Trust" on trillions of dollars of worthless paper that we don't have anything to back up except our promises, which are becoming very weak at this point?
Yeah.
Are we going to be a nation under God as we were, and we are not? Or are we expect him to bail us out of this? Or if not, I've heard from people I consider to have real prophetic gifts, saying this coronavirus is a child's play compared to what's coming. The next is a plague of I can't think of the right word, but where we all break out in bumps and infections.
Scurvy, yeah.
Well, yeah, it's a word that the Bible uses, but and that's where I go for my answers is the Bible.
Yeah.
And I know he's willing to give us yet another chance, but not if we're going to keep killing 1 million babies a year, just because they're out of the way, they're in the way, and if we're going to keep destroy the very meaning of marriage as between a man and a woman, if we're going to keep doing these things that he is offended by, then we cannot expect his continued blessing. It just won't happen.
Yeah, Mike Lindell, the pillow guy on TV, who you're
Yeah.
also very familiar and good friends with. He was at the White House recently with President Trump, and
Yeah.
and mentioned in front of the media his desire that people would get down on their knees and start praying through this difficult time. He was roundly ridiculed for that publicly and through the media. Why do you think that is nowadays? It never used to be that way, even before I was born.
Well, I'll tell you why. You're right. Before you were born, there was a across the board, let's say a 60% or 70% belief in God, belief in the Bible, going to church. Now the polls tell us that less than half of Americans attend a church. Even about that same percentage indicate they pray now and then. There is an ignorance of the Bible, and there's stuff in the schools that where we used to, when we could begin the day with prayer, even if atheists were in the classroom, I kept saying to atheists who were taking it to the Supreme Court and finally won, that the court agreed that we couldn't have school prayer because there were a few, like a tiny percentage, that were offended because they were atheists, didn't believe. I kept saying to their parents whenever I could, have you taught your child to be an atheist? Why don't you teach them to be proud of it instead of embarrassed by it?
Right.
Let them say, I'm not. You don't have to pray. Nobody else is making you pray. Why are you insisting that they not pray? That they can't have the right to do what they believe because of what you believe or don't believe. But that the teachers now there's a brainwashing amongst teachers that kids are not to even say the name Jesus. They're not to pray. They're not to bring a Bible to school. And more, they're relieved. Like right now, the BLM are trying to take, and they may succeed in taking the name of Washington off schools, Jefferson off schools, removing and trying to make our founding fathers racists.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of erasing history. It's revisionist history. And as good and as bad as some of our history is, to take it away is just naive. We have to learn from our mistakes.
Yeah, the Bible does that. The Bible, God bless the Bible. It shows us warts and all. It lets us talk about there was not one perfect man in the Bible except Jesus, and they crucified him. But I mean, Adam only committed one sin that we know of, but it doomed the human race. Abraham lied about his wife being his wife. It said he was his sister. He lied. David was an adulterer and a murderer, and on and on and on. And
they all end up repenting. They all
and God worked through them and even revived and used many of them. Paul was a murderer. The Apostle Paul that wrote a third of the New Testament.
That's right.
He was a murderer. He was there holding the coats and egging on the ones who were stoning the martyr Stephen. And then
now he's an apostle. Yeah, and now he's an apostle.
Then he became an apostle, and wrote a third of the New Testament. I tell you, the book in Proverbs says, if the foundations be destroyed, what will the righteous do? The righteous will be doomed along with everybody else if the foundations be destroyed. And that's where we're headed. That's where we're headed.
Well, Pat, I think that's a great kind of a landing spot. We're really out of time, but I just want to thank you so much for making time for the show today. It was really a true pleasure to interview you, and I just wish you nothing but continued success when you're going into your 8th and then your 9th decade of entertaining Americans and people around the world. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. And we'll try to do it again.
We will. I promise.
You're a very good
All right.
interviewer. I must say, you're a good interviewer. There's
Thank
nothing
you,
gimpy about you.
Thank you, Pat. Well,
Right.
thanks for watching, everybody. I'm Moose the Gimp. You heard it right from the
Gramp.
Pat the Gramp's mouth. So thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you next time on Moose the Gimp. All right.